Migrant domestic workers suffer modern-day slavery in Lebanon. The deportation of a beloved Ethiopian community leader refocuses attention on the difficult conditions endured by many African and Asian migrants working in the country. Beirut, Chanting Sami. Sami, dozens of people gathered at the entrance to the departures area of Beirut International Airport earlier this month, to bid farewell to Ethiopian activist Sami Tesfaye. After 13 years in Lebanon, the community leader was deported on February 18, with local authorities issuing a 1 to 5 year ban on returning to the country. For more stories from the media line, go to themedialine.org. While Sami committed no crime, the Lebanese state is actively criminalizing and punishing him, said Lebanon's anti-racism movement in a statement the night before his deportation. Sami was one of thousands of migrant workers in Lebanon affected by the discriminatory Kafala system. The Kafala system, which means sponsorship, is a set of practices, administrative regulations and policies that bind the residence and employment of these migrants to the will of their employer. Samaya Matuk. The Kafala system, which means sponsorship, is a set of practices, administrative regulations and policies that bind the residence and employment of these migrants to the will of their employer, explains Samaya Matuk, who works at the Lebanese Kafala NGO, which fights to end violence against women. How does the Kafala system impact migrant domestic workers in Lebanon? Lebanon is home to over 250,000 migrant domestic workers, MDW, who come from African and Asian countries and work in private households. The vast majority of these workers are women. Since the system that regulates their residency and work permit in the country is not based on any centralized law, most of these migrant domestic workers depend on traditions and informal decisions that function against their well-being. Once they arrive at their new houses, their bosses confiscate their passports, stop paying their salaries, prohibit them from contacting their families and lock them up when they leave the house, Matuk tells the media line. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO, around 50% of female employees in Lebanon used to work more than 85 hours a week. Most of them do not have free hours and are imprisoned far from home. And while this situation has changed in recent years, it is not for the better. The majority of the blame lies with Lebanon's worsening financial woes. For the past 3.5 years, the country has been going through one of the worst economic crises in the world since 1850, according to the World Bank. Almost 3/4 of the population are living below the poverty line, the United Nations says. The Lebanese lira has lost 95% of its value, and the migrant domestic workers have seen their salaries disappear along with it. Before the crisis, they used to earn just between $150 or $250 per month, most of which they would send back to their families back home. Many families are choosing to abandon these women in front of their embassies, and when the pandemic hit, most migrants gave up their hopes of recovering their unpaid wages and asked to return to their countries, an anti-racism activist who spoke on condition of anonymity told the media line. Created by a group of Lebanon anti-racism activists, this movement fights against what she calls modern-day slavery. Fighting modern-day slavery in Lebanon. Sarkalu Teshome from Ethiopia experienced the traumatizing Kafala system when she was 16 years old, following the dream of working in a household and sending money to her family. During her first 8 months of living with the Lebanese family she worked for, Sarkalu was not allowed to leave the house or even eat. She would feed herself with the leftovers from the young child she cared for. When she turned 17, her monsieur, the man in charge of her residency permits, asked her to have sexual relations, but she refused. It was only 8 months, but it was enough for a lifetime, Teshome tells the media line. I don't understand how some women can stay 2 or 3 years locked up, she says. After 9 years in the country, Teshome has managed to leave behind the distress of working in a domestic household. Now she has a good position with Médecins Sans Frontières, from which she helps women who are suffering through similar experiences to her own. She wishes to return to Ethiopia, but she has a son with a Lebanese man and he won't give his permission to her to take their child out of the country. I am still trapped, she laments. Being ignored and even criminalized by the Lebanese authorities, these women had no other choice but to organize themselves. Many organizations, representing every different community present in the country, have been the first responders for these social groups. Initiatives such as Egna Legna Beside, a collective of Ethiopian domestic workers in Lebanon, or the Alliance of Migrant Domestic Workers in Lebanon have been providing food, medication, health assistance and many other services to thousands of MDW. They have funded most of these women's return trips back to their respective home countries. What we have to do is fight as a community, as one people, Sigareta Brihanu, former domestic worker and current coordinator of Egna Legna Beside, tells the media line. There is no hope from the Lebanese side. The few good people that have helped us aren't enough, she says. As the ones suffering the most, they know how to find solutions, how to help their own people. We are the victims and we come from our own life experiences, Brihanu says. We created this organization to fight for ourselves, we are not waiting for someone to come and help us, she says. The struggle that we came from, the life that we are living. Only we know what it is like. The economic crisis has forced these women to put a stop to their long-term fight. Our main demand is to abolish the Kafala system, but it is a long process, says Brihanu. Most of the organizations established by the migrant workers want to end this system, which, before the economic crisis, saw 2 MDWs killed every week, either by suicide or under strange circumstances. Most of these deaths were never investigated. But the current dire situation in the country means their fight comes at the end of Lebanese society's list of priorities. Yet their presence in the country, despite the racism and ostracism they experience, is vital for Lebanese society, which is very much based on bragging and keeping up appearances. I would die to see how Lebanon would stand up if all the migrant domestic workers left, Teshome tells the media line. There is a culture of supremacy among the Lebanese when it comes to refugees or migrant domestic workers, says the anonymous anti-racism activist. It's very difficult to engage people in this conversation when they are convinced of their superiority. MDWs are leading their own fight in a country that simultaneously marginalizes them and depends upon them. We are living in the 21st century, are Lebanese really okay with slavery? Asks Brihanu. Do they really think that domestic workers are not human beings?
These Ethiopian domestic workers are begging people at their consulate to help them get home. They have nowhere to go after being kicked out by their employers, many of whom hadn't paid them in weeks.
Is sick and she refused to pay her. She bring her here. How can you drop a person in the street? It's haram.
Scenes like this have been playing out at consulates across the city. Foreign housemaids and child caregivers, like much of the country, have been suffering ever since Lebanon's economy collapsed late last year. But their situation has been made worse by a second crisis, an immigration policy known as Kafala. Kafala, or sponsorship, has been part of the Arab world for decades. It's a system where migrant workers, mainly from low-income parts of Africa and Asia, are allowed into the country as long as they stay under the control of their employers. In Lebanon, where there are approximately 250,000 domestic workers, many bosses take their employees' passports and rarely give them days off. Some don't even let their workers out of the house without permission. Or worse. These videos were collected by an NGO called This Is Lebanon. Domestic workers sent them in to document physical abuse by their employers.
If you people don't help me, I've lost my life here. I don't want to lose my life, I want to go home.
Police almost never prosecute abusive bosses. On average, more than one domestic worker dies every week, according to Human Rights Watch. Many from suicide or while trying to escape. Sigaretta Brihanu used to be one of them.
We are going up, okay, to the girls?
She came to Lebanon when she was 18. Now she volunteers with an NGO started by Ethiopian domestic workers.
Hi.
Brihanu's group helped put these women up in a hotel after they were dumped on the streets by their employers. We agreed not to show their faces.
Wow.
When Brihanu came to Beirut, she was promised to be a great opportunity for her to make some money while she continued her education.
When I come to this country, the reality way different. They just took me to a small room. They put me with many Ethiopian girls, and my employer, she showed up and she took my passport and she told me, you are going to my house and they are working for me. And that was tough time for me, not having day off and not having friends.
Do you think the Kafala system is racist?
The Kafala system is a modern day slavery, which is that control your freedom and make you to work without, having any access for anything. Having this kind of system It's a big shame.
Lebanese activists have been calling on the government to abolish Kafala for years, but the country's bureaucracy has been slow to respond. Deputy Minister Marlene Atalla is the closest thing the government has to someone responsible for domestic worker programs. She's been at the ministry for nearly 2 decades. Lebanon has had many governments over the years. Many of these governments have criticized the Kafala system, but none have done anything about it. Why is that?
موضوع نظام الكفالة بلبنان منه موضوع مهمل، بالعكس هو مثل ما بنعرف انه يعني ما كان تنقصنا النصوص القانونيه التي تحمي هذا النوع من العمل، لما بيكون في هناك استغلال، لما بيكون في حجز حريه، لما بيكون في عدم دفع الحقوق المتوجبه للعامله. هذا الهدف الاساسي بالنسبه لنا كوزاره، انه نحن الغاء هذا النظام واعطاء كافه الاجانب اللي بيشتغلوا بلبنان المساحه انه يقدروا يدافعوا عن حقوقهم.
The former minister described it as modern-day slavery. Why isn't this a priority then for the Ministry of Labor in Lebanon?
بالنسبة لهيدا المصطلح البعض يطلق عليه نوع من العبودية الحديثة. نحن كوزارة بنرفض هيدا المصطلح أكيد، وما بنقبل ولا عاملة موجودة بلبنان إنها هي تكون عرضة لأي نوع من أنواع الاستغلال. وبتصور يمكن إذا بعض أصحاب العمل اللبنانيين يسيئون معاملة بعض العاملات، هذا لا يعني إنه كافة الشعب اللبناني هو عم بيسيء المعاملة.
If you travel to another country, do you surrender your documents, your passport? Would you give it to anyone?
No.
So are you going to get rid of the Kafala system in this country?
نأمل هيدا الشيء.
A few weeks after this interview, the Ministry of Labor took its first steps, tweeting that it would issue a new contract that would guarantee domestic workers basic rights. But activist groups say it has no mechanism for enforcement and does little to address the fundamental problem of Kafala, that domestic workers are treated like second-class citizens. One reason the program has survived so long is that it's also been big business. There are hundreds of recruiting agencies in Lebanon, many of them small operations, like this one that Bassam Zazali runs with his mother.
Before we go to Ethiopia, we make advertising in all village. The far village, not in the city. We make advertising that some people are coming to see girl for work. We bring food and we make like a party. So all the village will come to see us.
Can you explain kind of how the economic crisis has affected the situation here for domestic laborers?
When I started this business, till this moment, all the time the people, they pay the salary and they pay everything, even in the war, everybody have money. But starting from 17 October last year, the people, they don't have any money. So they have big financial problem with the girl.
Is this a problem of the Kafala system? That the women don't have, the right to get the money that they're owed from their employers?
The problem now in Lebanon is not the kafala. The problem is economic, it's financial problem. I have one case here now and I will let you talk to her. Can I call her? Okay, Sharifa. Come, Sharifa. Come here, Sharifa. Okay. Here's a girl, they call me daddy because I treated them like the father. This lady, her name Sharifa, she's coming from Ghana. She's not have been paid for 7 months. Okay? After that, they refuse to pay her. So they send her back to the office. And from my side, I pay her all her salary to make her happy and don't let her go without her money. Okay? If she don't have me in this country, she will, and don't have kafala, she will stay without her salary and she will be lost in this country.
But this hasn't been the experience of most. In a tiny apartment in Beirut, we found a group of 34 women who lost their jobs and are taking refuge. Hi. So, this is a lot of people.
Yeah, as you can see, this is the way we're stuck in one home because of this bad kafala system.
They're all domestic workers from Sierra Leone. They're stuck here indefinitely because their consulate has been shut down.
All I found in Lebanon is a nightmare. Even though I'm so poor in my country, but I never sleep in a kitchen. Even though I am so poor, but I will have my daily bread to take care of me and my family.
And was that the situation for a lot of the women here?
Of course. This other girl that was sitting, yeah, look at her. Look at this other girl. This girl again went through the same thing. And look at this other one again. So you can see how many girls, most of we women that you see, we have dignities in our country. It's only when we come to work here, we found ourselves like nobody, but we are somebodies in our countries.
Do you think a lot of the abuse and the mistreatment that you all have experienced in Lebanon is a result of racism?
Of course, to the highest degree that I ever think of. Because even when we walk in the street, they call us sharmuta. There is sometimes that I go through so much abuses that I'm thinking of killing myself, because I think that is the only solution to my problem.
You have a family in Sierra Leone. Did you come here for them?
Of course, my baby was just 8 months old.
When you left to come here?
I just want to stop here. I don't want to continue.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you. I hope you can get back to your children soon.